Good morning, everyone, and welcome to this seminar on the cost of living. My name is Davina Rankin, and I am the chair of Unison's Campaign Fund Committee and also a member of our National Women's Committee, and I'll be chairing the seminar this morning. I'd just like to start by saying a few words about the Unison Campaign Fund. The Unison Campaign Fund is the affiliated part of our political fund, which means we don't pay money into Labour, but we use it to fund our major campaigns. So the recent campaigns we have run is around Together We Rise, the campaign for a decent pay rise. Previous ones were No Going Back to Normal. As we came out of the pandemic, that campaign to make sure things were better. We didn't go back to how public services were being run prior to the pandemic. And more importantly, our campaign fund sponsors a lot of the research that Maternity Action carries out. So I'm really honoured to be sharing this morning. If you're interested in finding out more about the campaign fund, you can see what we do on the Unison website, which is www.unison.org.uk. So feel free to have a look at what we sponsor, but I'm really proud that we have sponsored Maternity Action over several years, and we have continued to support them, and how we do so going forward, because I think a lot of the work we've done is really important about the cost of living impact on new mums and pregnant women, highlighted that there was definite asks that we could put to government, and there was the evidence base that could actually drive change. So I'm going to stop there, and I would like to invite Ross Bragg, Director of Maternity Action, to say a few words to open the seminar. Over to you, Ross.
Thanks very much, Davina, and good morning, everyone. Delighted to be here today for our seminar to launch our report, A Perfect Storm, on the impact of the cost of living on pregnant women and new mothers. And start by saying thank you very much to Unison for very kindly supporting the project, and to Aberdeen Financial Fairness, who's also contributed to the work that we're doing today. Maternity Action delivers advice on maternity rights to pregnant women and new mothers. We've got a team of in-house lawyers and advisors. We have pro bono lawyers from 5 of the top city firms working with us. We deliver advice to just over 3,000 low-income pregnant women and new mothers every year. We support women to keep their jobs. We support women to get the maternity pay and the maternity benefits that they're entitled to. We support migrant and asylum-seeking women dealing with charges for their NHS maternity care. We support midwives and frontline charities to ensure migrant and asylum-seeking women have access to basic housing and income. Our advice services help women to secure the employment rights, the social security rights, and the asylum support rights that they're entitled to. But increasingly, as the cost of living crisis has unfolded, we're finding that the support that women are entitled to is simply not enough to enable them to make ends meet. Through our advice services and through our research work, we're seeing families who are struggling to feed themselves, to keep the heating on, to pay the rent. We're seeing women going into debt to pay for essentials during maternity leave. The cost of living crisis is affecting migrant women and asylum-seeking women also. We're currently pursuing a legal challenge about support for asylum-seeking women, as the living conditions are so poor. It is clear that pregnant women and new mothers are not the only groups who are struggling in the cost of living crisis. A few weeks ago, the Joseph Rowntree Foundation released a report on destitution covering the whole of the community. And just yesterday, the Children's Society released a report on families, both new families and families with older children, and their findings very much reflect our own. It's certainly not just pregnant women and new mothers who are struggling at this time. So how do we create the change we need? And let's be upfront, the change we need is money. We need to have resources going into maternity pay, maternity benefits, and support for new families irrespective of their immigration status. This is a big ask at this time. It's an enormous challenge. Both the Conservatives and Labor have made it clear they are not planning to offer big spending commitments in the lead up to the election. Both have talked about fiscal responsibility. But what is very clear is we actually need these resources to go in to support these families now, because if we're not seeing the government resources going in to support these families, the burden is being carried by people who are least able to do so, by precisely the people we would like to see government providing its taxpayers' money to support. So what are we doing at Maternity Action to try and prompt this change? We're documenting the impacts on pregnant women, new mothers and their families of this underinvestment in maternity pay and benefits. In this project, we've looked at the impacts on the health of mothers and babies of low income in pregnancy in the first year, and there's quite a lot of evidence on this. We've looked at the impacts on relationships, we've looked at the impacts on gender equality, we've looked at the academic literature, the grey literature, which is literature released by charities and others, and we've also looked at lived experience. Our lived experience panel has been central to this project, helping us to plan the work and develop the recommendations, and very importantly, to give a human dimension to the very dry material in the journal articles and the statistics which we've collated in this report. And in our report, A Perfect Storm, you can hear their voices on every page. We had hoped to have Kiva from our panel to speak today, and her child unfortunately as well, so she won't be able to join us. We'll instead be hearing testimony from another one of our panel members. But who we'll be hearing from today are some excellent speakers. We've got Anna, who's the researcher who led on the project, who'll be presenting the report. We have speakers with frontline experience supporting low-income pregnant women and new mothers as health visitors, as midwives, and in community organisations. And we have speakers from the Royal College of Midwives, the TUC, and the Fabian Society, who'll be talking about the importance of investing in support for pregnant women and new families. This is, I think, the fundamental message that we're going to communicate to government. We really do need to have a focus on the investment. So look forward to joining you today. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ross, for setting the scene so eloquently and giving us the backdrop to why this webinar is so important at this time. Now, we were due to hear from Sonia Howard, who has not managed to join us yet, so if she can join us later, hopefully we'll slot her into the agenda later on, and she was going to talk about the focus of the research that is being carried out jointly between Maternity Action and Unison. But it now gives me great pleasure to welcome Neela, who will be reading the words of a lived experience speaker, a lived experienced member of the panel, and Anna, a senior policy officer at Maternity Action, to talk to us about exploring the impacts on pregnant women and new parents. So I'll start by handing it over to Neela.
Hi everyone. So I'm Neela, and I'll actually be reading the statement given from Katie, who has been contributing to the report, and she's one of the lived experience panel member. So I'll start reading, and yeah, let's go. So I gave birth to my little girl in January 2022. At the time, my partner worked full-time at a local authority, and I was on maternity leave from my position as a teaching assistant. Whilst we knew that me taking a year's maternity leave would mean that we would have to tighten our belts, we had no idea just how difficult the 12 months would be. I very much wanted to be able to cherish and enjoy the time I had off with my daughter, but this was significantly hampered by a severely diminished income. I had been unable to breastfeed, so the cost of formula and sterilizing bottles had a significant impact on our budget, and the rising costs of formula alone made things even tighter. Statutory maternity pay didn't go anywhere near the cost of living, and we were almost totally reliant on my partner's income. This meant that there was no money left for trips to visit family, which in turn meant that we missed out on important family time. We were also restricted in groups we could visit or experiences I could have with my daughter. This led to feeling quite isolated at a time when support from other new moms would have been extremely valued. There has never been a more critical time to assess the severe deficit between maternity pay and the cost of living. There should never, especially in 2022 in Great Britain, be a situation where families are choosing whether or not they can afford to have a baby, to start a family, or where families are making choices to keep their families small, just so that they could afford to live. When families in our society, our friends, our neighbors, our relatives are having to make these choices, changes to the current system are desperately needed and quickly. I'm immensely proud to say I'm one of the women that has been honoured to be part of the lived experience panel. I wish it was a very different experience. It didn't have to be, but the truth is, I was in a position where I was eligible to be on the panel. And oh my goodness, I'd shout from the rooftops if I had to, in order to change things for future parents to be, because nobody should be living the way I and many thousands have had to, in order to spend precious and magical time with our beautiful babies. We were slightly more fortunate than so many others in that we didn't have to make the choice between heating the house or being able to afford food. I was fortunate that I had some savings put, by that it meant we didn't go into debt. The situation has improved somewhat as I am back at work 2 days a week. However, childcare costs are over £500 for this 2 days just so that I'm able to work. I wouldn't change anything about being a mum except possibly the country in which I'm bringing my daughter up in. If I was in Austria or Switzerland or any of the Scandinavian countries where time off with your baby is promoted and enabled, my daughter's first few years would have been very different. I hope more than anything that in the very near future, we can celebrate families that have had babies in this country and give them everything they deserve in the start to have to their lives, in the families they come to. I hope those babies grow into thriving adults that can be proud to say their country gave them the best start in life that they could have hoped for. I hope that their lives are enriched by the opportunities their family could afford to give them, because maternity pay and paternity leave is, at the very least, in line with the cost of living in Britain, if not better. Now is the time that the families deeply affected in the past can help those in the future have a better offer. And that was my testimony from Katie.
Thank you very much, Nina, for giving voice to Katie's testimony. As well as being joined by my cat, we are now joined by Sonia Howard. Sonia, just to let you know, I'm going to move to Anna and take some questions, and then we'll bring you in at that point, if that's okay. So thank you very much, Neela. And Anna, the floor is yours now.
Thank you very much. I'm just going to share my screen. And if that is successful, then I can do my slides. Can you see the slides?
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much for being here today. In the last few years, we at Maternity Action have seen a lot of worrying impacts of the cost of living crisis. And for this project, we wanted to review the evidence of the impact of poverty and low income during pregnancy, maternity leave and return to work, including on health inequalities, gender inequality and family relationships. And we wanted to explore how the current maternity pay and benefit system is working for women and families, and also to make a number of recommendations for change. So what we did a rapid review of the academic and grey literature in this area. We carried out regular consultations on a quarterly basis with a diverse panel of 13 women from all over the UK. And we ran 2 surveys of women who had recently been on maternity leave in 2022 and 2023. So what do we mean by poverty and low income? We have not chosen one definition. We are including a relative poverty, absolute poverty, and also when you look at the literature in this area, it tends to be focused on long-term entrenched socioeconomic disadvantage, but there is also emerging new literature in the area of economic shocks. So we're talking about sudden or temporary loss of income, for example, job loss. All of these are relevant. So on to the findings. Socioeconomic differences in birth outcomes is a matter of life and death. Stillbirths and maternal mortality in the UK are quite high compared to other high-income countries, and the government has a target from 2015 to halve the rate of both of these things by 2025. It's not currently on track. The relationship between socioeconomic factors in birth outcomes is well known, and as we can see here, there's ONS data shows that stillbirth rates have been higher for mothers in the most deprived areas compared with the least deprived areas consistently over time. This is also true for maternal mortality. You can see here the social gradient in maternal mortality. So I've mentioned deprived areas, and these figures are based on the index of multiple deprivation. But like I said earlier about economic shocks, unemployment has also been found to be a risk factor for both maternal mortality and stillbirth. For example, one study using Embrace and UCOS data found that being unemployed was associated with almost twice the odds of death. Well, ethnic disparities in birth outcomes are well documented, as many of us will know. Compared to their white peers, there is 4 times higher risk for Black women and 2 times higher risk for women from Asian background to die in the perinatal period. Black babies are twice as likely to die in the womb or soon after birth. Of course, more research is needed in this area, but factors are likely to include things like higher likelihood of being in insecure work, higher risk of being in poverty, and worse experiences of maternity care. There are also specific factors affecting vulnerable migrant women. For example, NHS maternity care charges can start in the region of 7,000 for a straightforward birth. The difficulties in establishing migration status means that many women who are not chargeable are often pursued for charges, and many women do not know whether or not they are chargeable. This becomes a deterrent to engaging with maternity services, which is, of course, associated with poor birth outcomes. This group of women also deal with dispersal, where asylum-seeking women are sent to other areas, and that can disrupt, well, it does disrupt the continuity of care. There is, of course, also a lower level of financial support for this group of women compared to mothers who are on mainstream benefits. We also know that there are socioeconomic differences in child health and development. So in addition to stillbirth and maternal mortality, socioeconomic disadvantage is also associated with things like fetal growth restriction, low birth weights, preterm birth, and all of these factors are associated with child development problems. So, and also in childhood, but also in future adulthood. So things like heart disease and diabetes in adulthood. There are some figures showing that there was a study of 14,000 pregnant women experiencing an economic shock in the first 18 weeks of gestation. And it was found that this lowered the baby's birth weight by 40 to 70 grams. I'm going to talk a bit about food insecurity and nutrition. It's obviously one of the things that, one of the effects of having a low income. So, as we know, the importance of maternal and child nutrition is well recognized. It's part of NICE guidance. There is evidence that women who have anemia have a higher risk of maternal sepsis, postpartum hemorrhage, and they are 3.5 times more likely to die during the perinatal, the birth and the perinatal period. Inadequate nutrition during pregnancy and early childhood is also associated with risks like birth defects, and like I said earlier, also low birth weight, preterm birth, heart disease, and high blood pressure in adulthood. A recent Freedom of Information request by the Times Health Commission found that the cases of malnutrition in the UK have doubled in a decade and have quadrupled since 2007, 2008. So from 2022 to 2023 in April, 10,896 NHS patients, including 312 children, were hospitalized with malnutrition in England. In our survey, 49% of the respondents told us that they were buying less healthy food during their maternity leave due to the higher cost. Over 1/3 were eating less as a result, and a quarter had gone without food in order to feed their children, sometimes for a whole day. The Trussell Trust, the biggest distributor of food parcels in the UK, have reported that they distributed more food parcels in 2023 than any previous year. And the number of parcels delivered doubled between 2018 and 2023. Mental health is another area that is affected by low income and economic shocks. Mental health disorders are very common in pregnancy and perinatal period. 40% of maternal deaths in the first year after birth are from causes relating to mental health, and the leading cause is suicide. There is a large body of research indicating a strong link between financial stress, both permanent and temporary, and maternal mental health. And there is another strong link between maternal mental health and child mental health, often expressed in terms of behavioral problems in children. So, for example, women on our lived experience panel told us about the stress and anxiety that had come from having being treated poorly at work during pregnancy. So one panelist told us about making a flexible work request, and she said, "My boss made it the most horrendous process ever. The impact on my mental health, the anxiety, I actually didn't want to go back to work. In the end, I had to take a grievance, and this was successful, but that made coming back to work even more awkward." Another talked about the lack of regard for her health and safety. She was working in social care during the pandemic, and she said, "I thought to myself sometimes, you told me no heavy lifting, so why are you putting me on this floor with all these people that need to be lifted? They kept me on the busy floor, even though I was pregnant. My back was in pieces and my legs." And that brings us to the next topic, which is gender equality. Discrimination and poor treatment are still very common. As many as 77% of mothers have a negative or possibly discriminatory experience during the pregnancy, maternity leave, or return to work. There is also the motherhood penalty, the well-known fact that women's earnings tend to stagnate after having families, whereas the opposite is true of fathers. So women take the hit to their career when they start a family. Shared parental leave, one of the policy objectives behind this was to address this imbalance by challenging the assumption that it would always be the mother taking leave with a new baby. But unfortunately, this has been unsuccessful. Only 2 to 4% of eligible fathers are actually using shared parental leave, and it's mostly higher educated men, white men on higher incomes, and it's mostly men who have occupational parental pay. With regards to women returning to work after having maternity leave, on the one hand, we can see that many women are incentivized to return earlier than they would have liked as a consequence of low maternity pay. 58% of our respondents to our cost of living survey in 2023 had returned early or were planning to do so for financial reasons. And this is compared with 42% last year. Several of our lived experience panel members told us they had taken very short leave, sometimes around 3 months, even less. And some of them mentioned issues coming from this in terms of bonding, maternal mental health, and also recovery, physical recovery, as well as breastfeeding. One of our panelists said, "You're not the person you were before. I don't think anyone is. Personally, for me, I'm still getting checkups. I think, never mind the baby, I'm already back to work and my body hasn't even healed yet." On the other hand, childcare costs in this country are second highest in the developed world, according to some calculations, which means that many women cannot afford to go back to work. One of our lived experience panelists said, I have 2 children in childcare, which costs me £1,000. That's 2/3 of my wage. Childcare costs almost doubled between 2010 and 2022 for some parents. And the Parental Rights Survey, the government's Parental Rights Survey from 2019, released in 2023, found that 22% of mothers had not returned to work when the baby was 18 to 24 months. And for 56%, the reason was the lack of affordable childcare. A similar survey by Policy Exchange found that 60% of mothers would return to work who had not done so if they could find affordable childcare. There is a crisis in provision at present. There is insufficient funding. The IFS estimate that total real terms funding will be 8% lower in 2024-2025 than it was in 21-22. At present, only about 48% of local authorities have sufficient provision for local parents who need full-time care, even less so for children with disabilities. And of course, the free entitlement starts at 3 years for the vast majority of parents, and there is a gap of 3 years before the costs start to go down, in other words. The plans to expand this offer to working parents with children under 5 in 2025 have raised some concerns about funding shortages. I'm going to talk a little bit about family relationships. One of our panelists said, we hardly see each other because I work nights. I sleep when he's at home. Financial pressure puts pressure on families. One of the most well-known models for analyzing this is the family stress model, which posits that the mental and emotional stress of poverty and low income impacts negatively on parenting practices, which in turn impacts on child health and development. There is evidence that unemployment, which is an economic shock, can increase the risk that a parental separation will take place, and this follows a social gradient. So the lower the income, the more likely this is to happen. Parental separation following a relationship breakdown is one of the 10 original ACEs, adverse childhood experiences, which are linked with higher risk of poor health in adulthood. A 2023 study of single parents found that they are more likely to fall into poverty, they're more likely to stay in poverty. And this is, of course, 90% of single parents are women. And research also indicates that, on the other hand, having a father who is involved in child rearing and has a positive, capable attitude towards child rearing is actually a potential buffer against these effects on children of poverty and the stress and the poor maternal mental health. So that's another argument for fathers to take more leave. We've talked about the potential health impacts, or some of them, on mothers and their children. And next, I will talk a bit about how how the current maternity pay and benefit system is working for women and families. So eligibility is an important issue because, according to the latest Parental Rights Survey, only about 13% of women actually get occupational maternity pay. This is very low, and it's getting lower and lower since 2008, I think. The majority of women on maternity pay receive statutory maternity pay. 14% get maternity allowance and 16% get no maternity pay. And at present, the basic rate of SMP and the rate of maternity allowance are less than half of the legal minimum and a bit over 1/3 of women's median weekly earnings. So this is a big drop in earnings for the vast majority. You can see here that there is there is inequality in terms of being in secure work where you might have access to maternity rights, or being in an insecure job where you're unlikely to have maternity rights or employment rights. And Black women are twice as likely as white men to be in an insecure contract. So this is important because obviously things like length of service, earnings during the qualifying period, unplanned pregnancy, all of these things contribute to putting somebody's eligibility at risk. As one of our panel members pointed out, only about half of all pregnancies are planned, and women are expected to plan their pregnancies around these eligibility criteria. There is an anomaly in the treatment of maternity allowance under universal credit rules. So maternity allowance is deducted from universal credit, whereas statutory maternity pay is not. And this leaves recipients of maternity allowance potentially up to £5,000 worse off during maternity leave. Official data from HMRC and DWP shows that applications for maternity allowance reduced by 31% between 2016, when universal credit was rolled out, and 2021, whereas statutory maternity pay only reduced by 2% in this period. So this suggests that women who do not qualify for SMP may not be able to access any maternity pay. I'm going to talk a bit about maternity pay. I'm going to talk a bit about free prescriptions next. Pregnant and postpartum women are eligible for free prescriptions, but they have to have a maternity exemption certificate. And for this to happen, the healthcare professional, who is of course very busy with things, needs to make that application. The woman cannot do it herself. We have heard in our advice services from women who didn't realize that they didn't have the certificate, or they didn't realize that they needed the certificate. So they have been fined and charged for prescriptions that they may have picked up months ago, sometimes hundreds of pounds. And we did a small survey that showed women are experiencing stress, anxiety, and financial difficulties for this reason. One survey respondent said, "We have no spare money and trying to make ends meet in the cost of living crisis. And I'm terrified of further fine letters coming through the post now, because they do spot checks. So sometimes it comes up that somebody picked up prescriptions and they didn't have a maternity exemption at the time." Healthy Start is a scheme that helps pregnant women on low incomes to have access to nutritious foods and their children. So it was established in 2006 when the voucher was worth £280, and it has only been operated twice since then, in 2009 and 2021, and not by very much. So the lack of operating in conjunction with massive increases in food prices, including formula milk, means that the Healthy Start has less impact than it had at its inception, or probably any time since then. A 2021 legal challenge granted families with a British child under 4 access to Healthy Start. Of course, this still leaves a lot of migrant women out. Sure Start maternity grant is another benefit that hasn't been operated for a very long time. It was introduced in 2000, and it was £300 at the time. It's only been operated once to £500 in 2002, and in 2011 it was restricted to first babies only. Asylum support is for asylum seekers and refused asylum seekers who are not eligible for mainstream benefits. Instead, they can access a minimal safety net, which exists to prevent destitution. It is traditionally has been following about 70% of mainstream benefits, but at present it is worth just over half of what a person in comparable circumstances on universal credit would be in receipt of. It can include accommodation, food, financial support, or a combination of these. there is a asylum support maternity grant which mirrors the Healthy Start, the Sure Start maternity grant, and it's worth 300 or 250 depending if you're an asylum seeker or refused asylum seeker. And the application window for this is also much shorter than for the Sure Start maternity grant, apart from the amount being much lower. I do have recommendations here. Do we have time to go through them?
Yeah, we've got time to go through the recommendations. And sorry, just before you continue, can I just remind delegates that if you want to ask a question, you can pop it in the Q&A box and we'll take them at the end of Anna's presentation. Thank you.
So recommendations come under 3 different headings. The first of which is raise maternity payments and expand eligibility. So the basic rate of SMP and maternity allowance should be raised to at least the level of national minimum wage. The current 8-week qualifying period for SMP should be extended to cover at least 12 weeks earnings for those with variable hours, so that women on casual contracts are not disadvantaged by this. Healthy Start should be uprated in line with inflation. And eligibility criteria should be expanded to include women with no recourse to public funds. Sure Start maternity grant should be uprated in line with inflation and eligibility expanded to second and subsequent children. The policy anomaly that treats maternity allowance differently from SMP and the universal credit rules should be corrected. Regulations governing the maternity exemption certificate should be amended so that the certificate can be backdated to cover the full eligibility period, and anyone who has picked up medications during their eligibility period should not be charged or fined for any prescriptions. Secondly, we have recommendations that support women to access entitlements and remain in work. So rights and protections at work should be strengthened, including a right to flexible working and family-friendly working arrangements. Legal advice should be integrated into maternity services, following a health justice partnership model, which links pregnant women and new mothers with advice services through their midwife and enables them to access their entitlements and exercise their rights at work. The 30-hour entitlement to childcare should be available to families straight after maternity leave, rather than leaving it a 3-year gap, in order to keep women in work and earning. And shared parental leave should be replaced by a model that gives 6 months of maternity leave to the mother, and then 6 months each of parental leave to the mother and father, non-transferable and an individual right, rather than expecting mothers to transfer some of their maternity leave to the partner. The last lot of recommendations pertain to asylum seeking and migrant women, and we ask that administrative barriers to maternity payments should be removed, and payments are made automatically to women after notification of pregnancy. It should be easier to get these extra payments, and the link between asylum support and payments and mainstream benefits should be reinstated at 70% at least of the standard over 25 rate of universal credit. Payments for pregnant women seeking asylum are too low, and it's not possible to maintain a nutritious diet. It needs to be uprated further, at least to match the Healthy Start payments. And local authority support under Section 17. I didn't have time to talk about this in the presentation, but there is no set amount at present for how much migrant families getting support under Section 17 will get. There should be a national standard, a national minimum equivalent to that of asylum support. And that is all from me. Thank you so much for listening, and I would love to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Anna, for a very detailed presentation that not only has some concrete asks of government, but actually provides the hard evidence of why these are reasonable requests and actually would not only benefit those receiving the benefits, but also wider society with the impact of sort of the NHS through malnutrition of families and children. At the moment, I would like to fully encourage everyone on this webinar to actually pop some questions into the Q&A, and we'll put that to Anna. But while I'm giving you a chance to warm up your typing fingers and get the questions going, I'm actually going to bring Sonia Howard in. Sonia is a member of Unison's National Women's Committee and National Executive Council, and she's going to say a couple of words on why Unison is sponsoring research by Maternity Action into how the cost of living crisis is impacting on pregnant workers, new mothers and their families. So Sonia, the virtual floor is yours.
Thank you, Davina. Thank you for that introduction. Apologies for my lateness. I had network problems getting in, so typical online, isn't it? Or something goes wrong. But good to see you, and extremely good to listen to the presentation that Anna just presented. Absolutely full of detail and covering a wide variety. And I think most of what Unison is campaigning for. But as you've heard, I'm Sonia Howard, and I'm a member of the National Women's Committee, but I also serve on the NEC Committee, which is our national body representing Greater London. And today I just wanted to say a few words about why Unison is sponsoring research by Maternity Action into how the cost of living crisis is impacting on pregnant workers, new mothers and their families, and to introduce the project. Everyone is feeling the impact of the escalating costs of living, but it's hit new families particularly hard. The failure of maternity pay, as we heard, to keep up with spiralling price rises is driving many pregnant workers and new mothers into severe financial hardship. And as a union with predominantly women members, in fact, we've got over 1 million of them, raising the issues faced by pregnant workers and new mothers and families, protecting their rights and campaigning for change is an important part of our work. And to do this effectively, we need evidence. Unison does not have the capacity to do the detailed research that Maternity Action can undertake, or provides the specialist advice and the expertise needed. There are huge benefits for Unison from being able to draw on the evidence-based research, and it will generate support for our union's own campaigning and lobbying work. It will also actually help other unions support this work, but also benefit from any report that is published. So we've heard a lot about the aims of projects, but firstly, to build a stronger evidence base for widening eligibility and increasing rates of statutory maternity, paternity and parental pay and maternity benefits. And this will include about how the cost of living impacts on the health inequalities and show how supporting families can address poverty and gender equality. And we want to use this evidence to broaden the parliamentary support for wider eligibility and increased rates of statutory maternity, paternity pay and of course maternity benefits, particularly now as we will be going probably next year into a general election period. So we want to build a case against the attacks on maternity, paternity and parental leave, along with protections against the unfair treatment through the retained European and Union law bill. And we're also looking to identify strategic legal cases which we can take to challenge this unfair treatment in the workplace and to improve rights at the work for pregnant workers and new mothers. So as you've heard, we've collaborated with Maternity Action on previous projects. We collaborated on a report published in December 2021 called Unsafe and Unsupported: Workplace Health and Safety for Pregnant Women in the Pandemic. And this has helped Unison influence an important change in safety advice about risk assessments for pregnant workers. And as we've heard, one of the most exciting aspects of the project, as well as traditional surveys, as we've been gathering evidence from the roundtable focused discussions. questions and answer sessions, and lived experience panel, which has included Unison members, and to hear their personal stories about how they are coping with the financial and work situations having a new baby will bring at home. You will hear more about the project, and you've heard some of it already from my colleagues who are leading on this. And I'd have to just say thank you for listening. And as you say, if you have any questions, as Davina said, to put in the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sonia. I'm really glad you were able to join us, and you've outlined the importance this work is to Unison. I did say the questions were open, and we're going to be directing them at Anna. While you warm up your typing fingers, I'm going to ask a question of Anna, if that's okay. I'm going to abuse my position as chair. So Anna, you talked about migrant workers and perhaps hidden costs that most people don't know about the health insurance surcharge. And maybe if you could expand more on that point and how sort of the concrete asks and how that should be changed. I don't think people quite realise the cost of pregnancy, even in the UK. We all know how high it is in the States, but perhaps not in the UK.
There we go. Right, so the question was the cost of NHS maternity care, is that right?
Yeah, for migrant women.
Yeah, for migrant women. So yeah, it's a problem for this group because NHS maternity care charges apply to some migrants, not others, and it's not always entirely clear because you have to establish migration status. This is not always straightforward. And that means there's a grey area where a lot of women are being told that they're chargeable, or they might think that they're chargeable, or they might have an exemption that they need to prove, which is not always very easy to prove. For example, the effects of FGM, if they need treatment under, resulting as coming from FGM, then they are also exempt. But it can be difficult to establish exactly what part of their treatment would be pertaining to their previous experiences of FGM. So women are charged 150% of the standard cost of treatment, not 100%, but 150%. So the costs, they can run into thousands, 7,000 for a straightforward birth, and a lot more if somebody needs a cesarean or they need to be admitted after the birth. So one of the main things, this is part of the excuse me, this is part of the hostile environment policy that was introduced by Theresa May. And one of the things that happens when somebody has a debt of over £5,000 is that it needs to be reported to the Home Office, and that has impacts on the potential to apply for new visa applications, and it can hinder women from regularizing their migration status. So those are some of the things, and obviously that has impacts on women's engagement with maternity services, because they might be concerned that they're going to be charged and that they won't be able to pay. Ros, did you have anything to add on that?
Yes, I think the healthcare costs that migrants face in the country is not very well understood. I think this is seen as something that's only charged to wealthy women from abroad who drop in to get expensive care, whereas what we're dealing with is often very low income women who are really struggling to survive, facing bills of £7,000, £10,000 or more. And of course, if you do have a visa, your visa applications has an additional charge in relation to healthcare. So that just a regular process of regularising your status for yourself and your family can cost thousands of pounds in addition to the actual cost of the visa, because you're being asked to pay for health insurance. So you pay twice through your the tax system, because you're paying tax on your income, and also in association with the visa systems, because you need to have an additional sort of health insurance provision, which is charged upfront at that point in time.
Thank you both. The questions are now flowing in, so I've got a few more questions for you. First question is, has Maternity Action been in touch with the Women and Equalities Committee, who recently published a call for evidence on cost of living pressures on women?
I might take that one. The answer is yes. There's been, it's great to see the Women Equality Select Committee looking into that, and they're looking at the cost of living pressures on a number of different groups. We've made a submission based on this report to that inquiry, and hopeful that that will be picked up in that place. I think it's very important to have this visible at parliamentary level. Not many opportunities to do it, so the Select Committee inquiry is absolutely key here.
Thank you, Ross. Another question is focusing on, did your research include the experiences of families who have spent time in neonatal wards after birth, with the additional cost of transport, parking, and the stress, as well as the need for smaller clothing and accessories for the babies?
Yes, we had, I think, at least one, possibly two women in the lived experience group who told us about being admitted to hospital in the post birth period, and also having difficulties with getting flexibility from the partner's workplace, because the mother was unable to leave the hospital, and of course all the costs associated with not being able to take paid leave to do this as a second parent or father. So yes, and I don't think that's an unusual situation, unfortunately.
Maybe to go on, were there examples where women had to return to work before, for example, the baby had left the NICU?
Yes, we did hear from women about those experiences, and if you read the Perfect Storm, the shorter report, it has lots of material from the lived experience group where it talks about this, and also the mental health impacts of returning early when the baby is a premature child who still has health needs, and having to leave them in childcare. Many of women in our group actually went back around 3 months.
Thank you, Anna. Question that is a bit close to my heart, given I'm based in Scotland. Does the report reflect any of the differences in the maternity benefits available in the different UK nations, or did it just focus on England?
The breakdown of the different benefits includes all the different nations. So there are some differences that are noted in the report. Yeah.
I might just add to that by saying Scotland is outstanding in its approach to support for pregnant women and new parents, having set up a scheme of support which is well in excess of that offered from Westminster. So we certainly see that as the model we'd like the whole of the UK to have access to.
Thank you very much. I'm going to get asked two more questions. Do pregnant women get information from the NHS regarding what their benefits are? Well, what benefits are available to them at the antenatal appointments, so they're able to make informed choices?
So we have currently got a health justice partnership. Is Laura here today to talk about this? Or?
It might be hard to get Laura to join the panel. I can speak very briefly about the health justice partnerships if that's useful. Which is, in short, NICE guidance says that midwives should advise pregnant women and new mothers about their rights and benefits, so rights at work and the benefit system. That doesn't always happen. Midwives have a lot on their plate, and quite often women need expert support. So we've actually been doing projects in Cheshire and Merseyside and in Greater Manchester and East Cheshire, working with the maternity services to embed that advice in the actual appointments that women have with midwives. So while we'll provide the advice, they'll have questions about them to prompt them to access that advice while they're talking to their midwife. It's a really good model, I think, in making sure that women who might not otherwise ask about their rights are prompted to do so.
Thank you, Ross. I see Laura's joined the panel. I don't know if you wanted to add anything to that answer.
Oh, hi, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, I think just to say that, you know, we know that during antenatal appointments, women will often ask their midwives questions about things like benefit entitlements and what they might be able to access during pregnancy. So I suppose just to add that, you know, the Health Justice Partnership model is really about trying to address those questions. You know, midwives are understandably very focused on the clinical aspects of pregnancy and maternity care. So it's really about trying to support both women and families and maternity teams to access that specialist information and improve access so that women are better informed about their rights and entitlements in terms of both income issues and rights and entitlements at work as well.
Thank you, Laura. I've got one final question for you, Anna, and that is, do women have a right to the 6 to 8 week postnatal check-in primary care? Is this charged for in the same way, although GPs are not directly employed by the NHS?
That's a good question. Ross, do you know?
Any care which is provided by your GP is treated differently to care provided by maternity services. So generally speaking, if you're getting care through your GP, it's not charged for. So your postnatal check, if it's GP provided, wouldn't be charged for. Of course, if it's provided by a midwife as part of the scheme of maternity care, then that's generally part of an overall package that women are charged for. So it's not usually an additional payment, it's part of sort of a general package of support.
Thank you, Ross. I have one last question, which I will squeeze in, which is around, are there any specific recommendations from the report for women from Black, Asian or minoritized ethnicities based on some of your findings?
I think that as we have seen a lot of these effects on the cost of living crisis have disproportionately hit women from Black minority ethnic backgrounds. So for example, as we saw, I shared a slide about the likelihood of being in insecure work. We want work to be more secure, better working rights, better access to maternity benefits. That will have an even bigger impact on those who are more likely to be in those kind of jobs. So that's one thing. There are probably other things.
Thank you, Anna.
Yeah.
We are just 1 minute behind schedule, so I'm going to squeeze in one last question, but it's aimed at Sonia. I don't know if Sonia is still there, but it's a question aimed directly at you. Have you?
Yeah, I've seen it. Yeah, aware of health and safety obligation. It's an interesting question, Sandra. I mean, I think certainly in my workplace, yes. And partly because I think COVID raised the bar, didn't it, for risk assessments? I mean, risk assessments, I don't think anybody knew what a risk assessment was until it was coming out of the house. The mouse, unfortunately, is the Prime Minister at the time. So I think generally, yes, I think it brought that attention or focused that attention to risk assessments. And of course, that clearly would be around pregnant workers within the workplace. I mean, obviously, I haven't obviously got a survey or research in that specifically, but I would like to think the answer to that is yes, Chair.
Thank you, Sonia.
Thanks, Serena.
I think there has been. I think good employers are aware of their health and safety obligations, and I think even the bad ones are taking more time over it. And I think Sonia's right. I think the COVID and the avalanche of risk assessments we all went through during that time So can I just thank Anna, Ross, Sonia and Laura for handling those questions and provided some really detailed answers to us all. Just to remind delegates that the slides and recording of this will be available later on the Maternity Action website, just in case you've missed some of the stats that were in Anna's presentation. So thank you all for that session. It's now time to hear about the experience of the people on the frontline services. It gives me great pleasure to welcome our next three speakers. Loretta McGurry, Head of Nursing at Evelina Communities Children's Services. And I apologise if I pronounce your name wrongly, but Carolina Quesido, Policy and Communications Manager on Labour Exploitation at LAWRS, and Jackie Bleach, Safeguarding Wife, Imperial College Healthcare NHS Trust. And we'll hear from Loretta first. So over to you, Loretta.
Good morning, everyone. Sorry, it's myself and Flair, but we're representing Health and Loretta as well. So thank you for the brilliant speakers that has gone ahead of us. And I must say we're quite honored, myself and Flair, to be invited from the community to share our experiences and contribute to this project. So we're going to be talking about the ways the cost of living, high cost of living, is impacting and affecting families in the community. So we've got some areas, 9 areas. I'm going to talk about a few, and then Flair would carry on with the rest. So the first area that we'll be looking at is on food poverty. So in the community, we have experienced a large number of families who are requiring food bank vouchers. So Lambeth Food Bank Partnership distribute over 25,000 food bank parcels between April 2022 and April 2023, which is a 15% increase on the year before. Families we have seen are now depending more on frozen foods during visits to the home, as they are unable to cook daily hot meals to serve the children. There's also an increase in toddlers measuring on high centiles during clinic attendances, and this really impacts on their risk of childhood obesity. Also, mothers are often neglecting their own nutrition in order to prioritize their children's needs. We have seen the introduction of projects in the community, such as the community pantries, where clients pay £5 weekly membership fee and they receive 20 items of food. As professionals, we welcome such schemes. Another area to look at is families depending on charities. So we've got charity called The Little Village, which requires professionals to do referrals for families to receive items such as nappies, baby grows, bottles, and pushchairs. Little Village operates across all boroughs in London. In recent times, we have experienced this charity is experiencing overwhelming numbers of referrals, such that there has been a temporal halt in referrals from professionals. In 2022, Little Village supported over 7,000 children and distributed 2.75 million worth of items. We also touch on an area which is maternal mental health. So when conducting new births, we have seen an increase in mothers reporting to be anxious, stressed, and depressed. We have also seen an increase in maternal anxiety and depression following assessment of clients during visit, especially at the new birth visit contacts and reviews at the clinics. More perinatal mental health referrals are being rejected at present as the criteria to accept referrals becomes tighter due to the demands on the service. Routinely ask mothers at appointments or at new birth, we use the Woolly question to assess their mental health. And more often we are seeing that these moms are answering positive yes to feeling anxious and depressed. More mothers report that the financial concerns are contributing factors to their anxiety. Also, the high cost of living is having an impact on the development of children. We have seen an increase in the number of babies who attend daycare, nannies, as parents need to return to work earlier than usual. This has impact on exclusive breastfeeding, as we are seeing a reduction in babies who are exclusively breastfed for the first 6 months, which is the recommendation by the World Health Organization. We have also seen an increase in parents not attending developmental reviews as they have to return to work due to the financial pressures. Others have reported unable to attend and receive time off from work due to fear of losing their jobs. Therefore, these reviews, which would have helped to identify any deviation or any delays in development needs, are missed. There are also children with concerns reported late by parents around issues such as the speech and language, potty training, etc. Parents are requiring further support regarding activities and referrals. So we have seen an increase in referrals to the community pediatricians and speech and language due to this. Mothers are unable to prioritize their children's health and development needs due to the stress of meeting financial burdens. And also we have identified an increase in referrals to specialist services such as the Charter Time and community development teams. However, due to work commitment, there's also an increase in the discharge because parents are not able to attend these appointments and are DNAing these reviews. I'll pass on to my colleague, Blair.
Hello. So I'm just going to touch on some other areas that as health visitors, we are seeing the cost of living crisis affect families. So first of all, it's putting a greater pressure on free children's services. We have seen over the past 5 years, children's centres closing at a higher rate due to council cutback. And as health visitors, we know how vital these baby and toddler groups are at supporting a child's growth and development. The first 1001 Days movement actually acknowledges that it is much easier to influence a child's development and well-being if we intervene earlier in life. However, so many free under 5 playgroups have become overrun in our local area, often with children being turned away when the playgroup has reached capacity. We also know that families who could benefit the most from children's services are least likely to have access to them. As services become more stretched, there are fewer free options for parents affecting children's development, and we know how important these groups are for children's development, especially speech development. Another area we're seeing is more antenatal referrals. Seeing an increase of referrals from midwifery of expectant mothers regarding concerns about mental health and homelessness. According to NICE, around 12% of pregnant women experience depression and 13% of pregnant women experience anxiety at some point throughout their pregnancy. Lambeth does not routinely carry out antenatal health visitor visits. However, in the last 12 months, we have seen a sharp increase in these referrals coming through from the midwife. And the majority of these referrals are actually for mental health concerns. We are also seeing more homeless expectant mothers presenting to our service. The housing system is incredibly difficult to navigate, and in our experience, even though the candidate is an expectant mother, this does not result in housing finding them appropriate accommodation more quickly. I personally have seen mothers who are sofa surfing, and therefore they are not staying in one area. Because of this, it is easy for these women to fall through the cracks as they are handed over to different teams as they move around London. It makes it incredibly challenging for professionals to support them as we cannot travel out of area to visit them. I've experienced this recently as I had a referral for a pregnant lady who was sofa surfing out of borough. So I agreed for her to meet me at our offices to complete her housing application and mental health assessment. This was made even more complex as English was not her first language, but I was concerned she would not be able to complete the housing assessment alone or have the support of any other health visitors to do it. We'll also see an increase in family remaining in inappropriate accommodation. Lambeth has over 1,600 families with children living in temporary accommodation. This number has increased year on year since 2016. During home visits, we are seeing more families living in accommodation that is not appropriate. Homes need repair and they are unsafe. Families expressing that they are unable to move or save for a deposit to privately rent. The area we work in is a relatively affluent area, but we are seeing the pockets of housing poverty grow. Damp and black mould remain a major concern in a number of council properties on my caseload, particularly concerning when the child in question was born premature and already has compromised lungs. These families have no choice but to remain in this inappropriate accommodation despite their concerns, as they don't have the financial resources to privately rent elsewhere in London. All health visitors are also reporting an increased number of safeguarding families allocated to their workload. Worsening living standards combined with an increase in poverty is resulting in more instances when a child's basic needs, such as clothing, warmth, and food, are not being met by parents. This can also lead to social isolation. As families are unable to support themselves, they may isolate themselves from the wider community, which can create a dangerous environment for vulnerable children. As with all areas of the NHS, the number of working health visitors has reduced drastically over the last decade. Professionals often report they do not feel they can spend the time they want to with certain families on their caseload. And finally, concerns about heating. Mothers have expressed to us concern about heating and bills as the weather is getting colder and we approach winter. An incredibly difficult thing for us as health visitors to support, as we cannot offer financial support. We are anticipating an increase in A&E attendances due to respiratory infections as heating prices remain high and parents will be reluctant or unable to keep their homes warm. These trips to A&E and subsequent admissions are stressful for both parents and children, and many could be prevented. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much to both Henrietta and Fleur, and apologies for introducing you with the wrong name to start with. So thank you for your really poignant evidence and impact the cost of living is having on new mums and pregnant women. It now brings me to Carolina and to invite her to speak. So over to you. Thank you. No. And I give you apologies for, I presume, mispronouncing your surname.
It's okay. I'm just going to share my screen. Okay. Oh. Can you see that?
Yep, we can see your first slide.
Oh, has it gone back to? Oh.
It's gone back to the, yeah. That's you on slideshow now.
Oh, God, how am I not able to see my notes? I'm so sorry about this.
Take your time, take a deep breath, and once you're ready, just start. And while Caroline's getting ready to go, can I just remind people that if you've got any questions at all, please pop it into the Q&A section. Thank you.
Are you still able to see my
we can
my
see
slideshow?
No, we see your notes.
Carolina, if you want, I can share your slides and you can.
Oh yes, thank you so much.
No worries.
I'll stop sharing. Hold on. God. Share. Thank you.
Technology is wonderful, but it does challenge us, so don't worry. Get there.
I know, 3 years on, and I'm still struggling.
I'm sharing the slide. Can you all see?
Yep, I can see the first slide.
Okay, thank you. If you move on to the next one. Thank you. Hello, I'm Carolina Caicedo. I'm the Policy and Communications Manager on Labour Exploitation at the Latin American Women's Rights Service, and we are known as LAWS. So LAWS is a feminist and human rights organisation, and we are run by and for Latin American migrant women. We are primarily a frontline organisation, so we provide advice on welfare benefits, debt and employment rights, immigration and family law, and we also offer counselling and specialist support for women experiencing gender-based violence, and we also have a range of community and integration projects. And we also do some policy work, and we have two kind of focus areas, which are labour exploitation and violence against women and girls. And our policy work in these areas is informed by the day-to-day issues that we see Latin American migrant women facing at the front line. Thank you. The next slide, please. So before we talk about the cost of living, it is important to talk about the context of women migrant workers in the UK. And their working conditions are the foundation of the economic precarity that migrant women face. And so I will do this by referring to the experiences of Latin American migrant women. And at Laws, we witness how migrant women are overrepresented in feminized job sectors. So 46% of Latin American women are in low paid employment, such as cleaning, caring, hospitality, and domestic work. And these are sectors in which they're enduring employment rights violations and they're experiencing in-work poverty. Now, the barriers and discriminations that they face are what keeps them in these job sectors are systemic. So not speaking English is one of the biggest barriers to not finding better employment. Migrant women are also tend to be highly qualified, but then they encounter difficulties transferring skills and qualifications in the UK. They lack knowledge of the system, but then also financial difficulties and lack of access to welfare benefits also increases the pressure that they have to take whatever employment is readily available to them. And also because of the antisocial, long and fragmented hours of work that they face in these sectors, or because of the caring responsibilities that they have little time to learn English or reskill, and so they struggle to find better employment, and so they remain stuck in a cycle of poverty that's very hard to break. Next slide, please. So in 2019, we published The Unheard Workforce, and it's a report that's documenting the experiences of labour exploitation and labour rights breaches of Latin American migrant women working in cleaning, hospitality and domestic work. And so these are the three feminised job sectors in which Latin American women are overrepresented in the UK. And this report gathers evidence from 3 years of our employment rights advice service. So although the majority of the Latin American migrant women we support are employed, they suffer high levels of exploitation and including systemic underpayment. So these are just some of the findings from our report, but they relate to the underpayment that migrant women face. So unlawful deductions of wages is the most common type of abuse we see through our employment rights service. Women are regularly paid less than the national minimum wage. In these sectors, women often don't meet the minimum income to qualify for statutory sick pay, and so they are forced to work through sickness, including surgery, or they arrange and pay for someone else to cover their work during periods of sickness. Women are denied annual leave, or if they do take it, they're not paid for it, and if pregnant, many are not paid for hours spent at prenatal appointments. So the results of this research were not surprising to us. It's what we see and continue to see at the front line. But these labour abuses translate into high levels of in-work poverty. And then that has kind of usual consequences in other areas, such as precarious living conditions. And for women experiencing gender-based violence, it kind of increases the economic dependence they have on perpetrators or exploitative employers. So there's obviously a gendered aspect to this work. So these are unregulated job sectors where the workforce is invisible or antisocial. Work hours isolate employees, making labour exploitation endemic and difficult to redress. And so now moving on to how the cost of living crisis is impacting migrant women, I think it's important to recognise that the crisis resulting from the increases in the cost of living is not a recent issue for marginalised communities. So for migrant women, the cost of living crisis did not start now. Migrant communities, especially migrant women, are dealing with the cumulative and disproportionate impact of increasingly restrictive hostile environment policies, 13 years of austerity and underfunding of public services, the after effects of Brexit and the economic precarity fostered during the COVID-19 pandemic. So such that migrant women basically have now very little resilience to weather the cost of living crisis. And so the crisis has basically just exacerbated issues that they were already facing. So with the rise of inflation, low paid workers have just been pushed into destitution. Last year, 50% of the women we supported were primary carers of a child or children under 18. Women who have children under 3 are only able to work a few hours around the childcare that a partner or family can provide. So they tend to take on either short hours in very early morning shifts or late night shifts, or they just simply cannot work until their child is free and they're able to access 30 hours free childcare. And despite the preponderance of low pay and the need amongst the community, our community has low access to public services and welfare benefits. And that's because they face just lots of barriers to accessing information about this. And actually 1 in 5 in the community do not access welfare benefits. So this is one of the biggest issues for migrant mothers and new mothers. It's not knowing what they are entitled to or how to access it. And we even see mums who have paid rogue advisors to set them up with universal credit, but then they have no access or control over their account. And then it makes it even difficult for our own advisors to help them. For those that do have access, the situation is not much better because they're experiencing a shortfall in the real value of welfare benefits, alongside the retraction of the £20 universal credit uplift that was given during the COVID-19 pandemic. And also, the government response to addressing the negative impacts of the cost of living crisis are really kind of just negligible, or just really basically not enough, such as the energy cost allowance. But it also just disproportionately excludes migrant communities because they just face such barriers to accessing support or knowing that support is available. At the most basic level, we have service users who do not realise that they can change tariff, or that they can pay by direct debit to reduce energy cost, or if their landlord has introduced a prepay meter, they do not know that they have the right for that to be changed. So in most cases, the most financially vulnerable are paying the highest tariffs and bills. I think for migrant communities, the hostile environment policies are just hugely restrictive. So between 30 and 40% of the women accessing support from us are subject to no recourse to public funds policies. And this includes women who have the right to work. And this policy just increases their vulnerability to either experiencing destitution or often just being forced to work in exploitative conditions because they have no access to welfare benefits. I think it's already been mentioned before, but increases in visa fees also contribute to destabilising migrant community finances. It makes it easy for people to fall out of status due to the lack of resources to pay for visa renewals. And also facing kind of the underfunding of women's organisations. So crucially, BIFA organisations are being underfunded, whilst they are usually the ones holding and supporting the most vulnerable. And it's important to emphasise that the women we support just simply do not access mainstream services. So if they're not accessing support from us, it means they're not accessing support at all. Next slide. I know I just have a few minutes. Kind of just to conclude, is like what we are witnessing is really a deepening poverty and inequality amongst our community. So housing is currently the biggest issues. So landlords are transferring the cost of living and the hike in mortgage interest rate to renters. And the problem with our community is because lack of access to social welfare means that our community is kind of concentrated in private rentals, so overcrowded and inadequate housing. And obviously there's just no rent controls in the private sector. And some of our services users are seeing their monthly rent go up by 50%. And if they can't afford to pay those rents, there is also no alternative for them anywhere else. So which is just leading to increasing homelessness. So in 2022, we saw our homelessness cases rise to 65% from 43% of housing cases in 2021. Debt is a huge problem. Latin American women are often the heads of households. They're in charge of household budgets, so they're bearing the brunt of rising costs. And women are just having to choose between paying bills or having food to eat, or they're just increasingly accruing credit card debt, or in the worst cases, they're turning to loan sharks to make ends meet. And I think this is both delaying and escalating a debt crisis, which will just we're going to see this issue into the future, because I think there's going to be far-reaching consequences related to bad credit debt, which will risk their ability to rent, find employment, or access services in the future. we are seeing a huge rise in referrals in oversubscribed food banks and baby banks, which kind of makes them virtually inaccessible. When we have provided food at our events become oversubscribed with new users to our services, because these moments provide the only moment that women have access to food. Our caseworkers are buying food for clients during appointments. But this is also means that the pressures our beneficiaries are under are exacerbating a mental health crisis. A significant portion of the women coming to our counselling services are taking on extra jobs, including exploitative and unsafe jobs in higher kind of paying and formal markets, and so they consequently have heightened levels of stress, but have few mental health support services to access. The number of violence against women and girls cases are up during the cost of living crisis. And it's important to say that the crisis is not the cause, but it is exacerbating the vulnerabilities to violence. So women are having to choose whether to stay with a perpetrator or become destitute. And just to finish, 3 years on from the beginning of COVID, the demand for our services is not abating. Instead, we are just seeing a rise in a complexification of their needs, without women being able to access a correlating increase in support. So it is clear to us that the scale and reach of the cost of living crisis has rapidly exceeded the depth and reach of the COVID pandemic. Thank you.
Thank you very much for that very detailed and informative presentation, highlighting the disproportionate impact of the cost of living and austerity are having on migrant women who were already marginalised in our society. So thank you very much. Our last speaker on this section is Jackie. So the floor is yours, Jackie.
Hello, so I'm Jackie. I'm one of the safeguarding midwives for Imperial, and I've been asked to come along and talk along with the other speakers about the experiences that we're having as midwives on the ward, and sort of give you some reflections of what we're seeing for the women. Just to give you a bit of background, I work at both Queen Charlotte's and St Mary's, and I'm part of a small team, but we sit within the wider safeguarding team. So we encompass maternity, children's, adults, and we have also specialists in learning disabilities and autism and domestic abuse working within our team. So we're really lucky to have them, so we can draw on their expertise when we get complex cases. I've been in the role for about a year now, but previously I was a community midwife for 6 years. So I have a wealth of experience with antenatal and postnatal care, but with a real interest in safeguarding cases and vulnerable women. So that's where my passion lies. So I've always been involved with women that are more vulnerable and working with the families. And at Imperial, we cover a really wide catchment area. So we're covering the 5 boroughs, Hammersmith and Fulham, Ealing, Brent, Westminster, RBKC. But we're also providing care to out of area women who want to access our services. And we're a really busy trust with about 8,500 births a year. My role's not directly clinical, but my team do offer advice to the staff, how to proceed with safeguarding cases, vulnerable cases, liaising with all the outside agencies, training, supervision, and representing the trusts on meetings, things such as child protection meetings, MARAT meetings. But I will also deal with instances that happen on the ward. I often get called down to respond to things that are happening actually in the hospital, and I will respond to emails from midwives with concerns. And to put these emails in context, last year our team received approximately 28,000 emails about concerns about women. We've already exceeded that for this year before we got to the end of October. So it is increasing. There are a lot more concerns about women and safeguarding and vulnerable women. We're now coming into contact with a much larger volume of social concerns and complexities, and it's mental health, domestic abuse, substance abuse, financial and immigration issues, housing, and many of our patients now have an actual complex mix of a variety of these that work all together. As midwives, we are in a position to work with the women and the families throughout their pregnancy and into the first month of their baby's life. And it's a real privilege to be able to support them with this. But I would say a growing number of our patients are finding they are now struggling, as the other speakers have talked and highlighted. And it's often difficult for us as healthcare professionals to deal with this and support appropriately. Housing seems to be something that is now featured a lot in conversations with midwives. When I first started as a community midwife, I would say it was a topic that was rarely discussed, but we now have more patients reporting that they're not in suitable accommodation and they need support from us as healthcare professionals to be moved. I've seen a rapid increase on this being reported via our midwives over the past year, and patients asking for any support we can give to them. And unfortunately, this is a really difficult area because as healthcare professionals, we don't have a say in this, and we're quite limited in what we can do. And all we can provide is basic letters to the housing departments, confirming the pregnancies and pointing them in the right direction to get help. And this can often cause quite a lot of upset and annoyance with our women and their families, because they feel that as midwives, we should be doing a lot more to be able to help them with rehousing. And I've personally been in antenatal appointments and been shouted at by partners of why can I not do something? Why can I not rehouse them? Why can I not give suitable housing? And in healthcare, we can't. We can only, as I said, signpost them to the relevant services and support for that to be addressed. I've also been called to the postnatal ward on numerous occasions recently where women have refused to leave our wards because they don't feel they have a safe place for them to return home to. And this is a really difficult situation for everybody involved, staff and the women, because social care will only become involved if the women are homeless and have nowhere safe to be discharged to. So it becomes a very difficult situation. Just 3 weeks ago, we discharged a patient from our wards who'd been here, and she was on day 27 postnatally. And it was because she was homeless and there was nowhere for her safe to go. And social care were involved, but it was about securing safe accommodations. That was a long time she was sitting on our ward for a non-medical reason. And it just highlights how difficult it is than the housing crisis that's going on. We're also seeing an increased number of women and families in temporary accommodation, and often there's no kitchens to prepare milk for newborns or food for themselves, and they're either relying on unsuitable meals provided by the hotels or hostels or expensive takeaways. So they're not getting the adequate nutrition they are antenatally or postnatally. I think, as Henrietta and Fleur said about Little Village, I mean, it's a charity we use a lot of the time. We always ask about preparations for the arrival of a new baby antenatally. We're often hearing that due to the cost of living going up, families don't have those basic items and they're struggling to afford them for the new baby. We can make referrals to baby banks and Little Village and Salvation Army. And as they said before, they've been able to provide really good quality second-hand donations of clothes and equipment to help out those really in need. Recently, however, I'm hearing from the fellow midwives that these applications via the charity websites are regularly being suspended. And again, to put this in context, if you'd asked me a year ago, I would have told you that I'd heard that Little Village was shut once. Now, I'm often hearing that it opens for referrals on a Monday morning, and by the end of Monday or Tuesday, it's now been suspended and they're not taking any more referrals for that week. So it really highlights there is a demand for all these essentials and support with these essentials that unfortunately they're unable to match. One of our roles is to promote safety for a newborn, and we will always discuss safe sleeping and reducing instances of cot death or sudden infant death syndrome with the parents. We don't advocate for co-sleeping due to the increase in this risk. And as midwives, we will always check that before discharge from the wards, the women have a cot or a Moses basket and somewhere safe for that baby to sleep. More and more it's been reported on the postnatal wards that women don't have these and don't have means to actually buy them and purchase them. We have bought some as a charity that we do give out in some cases, but we're running out of those as well. So again, it's highlighting the risk that people aren't able to buy these essential items that are basics for the safety of their children, of their newborns going home. Domestic abuse, we have seen a rise of the number of domestic abuse cases at the moment. This maybe we're better at identifying them and talking about them more, But I think a lot of it is down to pressures in the home, home environment, and causing more stresses. And interestingly, I read a recent quote that said, couples who report feeling high levels of financial strain are 3.5 times more likely to be involved in domestic violence compared to couples who report feeling low levels of financial strain. So again, this highlights the impact of the financial strain can have on family dynamics. Postnatally, there's an increase in number of partners returning to work very quickly after our patients have delivered. And this will have a direct impact on our mums recovering from their delivery, either a vaginal birth or a cesarean, support with looking after other children in the household while they recover, and the partner's bonding time with the new baby. Myself and colleagues regularly carry out home visits on day 2 or day 5 postnatally, for example, and we will ask where the father of the baby is, and we're told that they've gone back to work as they couldn't afford to take this time off. That often leads to women feeling isolated at home with partners returning, and can lead to low mood, changes in women's mental health, and also affect their breastfeeding rates. A recent email last week to one of our postnatal midwives illustrated this by telling our team of a third-time mum whose partner had returned to work the next day after as a delivery driver, and she'd been left at home with 2 very small children, a new baby, and this was after a difficult cesarean section and on the 3rd floor of shared housing. So it's very difficult when partners are forced to go back to work because of financial strains, and it does put an impact on the whole of the family. One of the other issues that we see regularly now in our antenatal clinics is issues around immigration and no recourse to public funds. Being a very busy hospital in London, we have got an extremely diverse population, and many of the women who access our services are refugees or seeking asylum. Depending on their status, this will affect their eligibility for claiming universal credits and benefits, accessing housing options, and claiming support such as Sure Start grants. The midwives are able to signpost the women to some of these, such as maternity exemption forms, and signposting families to children's centres for support, and offer essential advice and support. But just, I know it was mentioned before, but the antenatal appointments are often very, very complex, and very short on time. And it's very difficult to complete all the medical checks and all the pathways from the maternity point of view and the antenatal point of view to be able to properly share this information, signpost women to the right places to get this additional support and help. So as you can see, we face a lot of challenges in midwifery, and due to time and resources available, there is limited that we can do, but we do continue to try and support all the women we can and signpost them wherever we can. And we do it for a majority of women, but there's a lot of people that we'd like to do a lot more for.
Thank you very much, Jackie, for your presentation today and bringing to life the impact that this is having on frontline services such as maternity profession within the UK. We've got one question in, but we've got 5 minutes to go before we're due for a scheduled break. So I'm going to take this question and sort of mix it up a little bit and throw in a change. The question talks about the attendee providing support for a new mum in unsuitable accommodation and the hurdles that they're having to go through to actually get suitable accommodation, including complaining to the Ombudsman. And their question is, how do we challenge local authorities without having to go through multiple levels of complaints? My question, to sort of widen that out so everyone has the opportunity to answer, is what is the one thing that you would want to change that would make life better for the women you represent? What is the one thing that would make the biggest change to those women? And if I take you, Caroline, who's in the front of my screen, if you want to go first, then I'll come to Jackie and then we'll go back to Henrietta and Fleur.
You mean in relation to housing? Yeah. I mean, I would say that what we need right now, and I think everyone's kind of mentioned it, is I think just community services like ours just need much more funding, because basically what's come through what everyone has said is just like the level of advocacy that is required to access support, especially for migrant women, or the most vulnerable who might be undocumented or have no recourse to public funds, you know, they're being met with the underfunding of social services. So, for example, with women have no recourse to public funds, we are seeing, or who are pregnant or have children, you know, we often appeal to Section 17 to offer them. That's kind of the only support that women with no recourse to public funds have access to. But we're seeing local authorities sort of resist that as much as possible. And that's obviously due to the underfunding and kind of the lack of their capacity. So, I mean, just funding is what is needed on all fronts. And from our side, it is just would allow us to up our capacity to support the level of advocacy that is needed for the rise in complex cases that we are seeing.
Thank you for that. Jackie, do you want to build, apart from having a magic money tree and more funding for all services?
I think for maternity, one of the biggest things is time. Is having that time to explore things, to talk it through. The appointments are more and more busy. There's more to do. There's more paperwork. And as you said right at the start, technology is meant to be there to help us, but it does make sometimes the appointments longer. If we had more time, we would be able to signpost more. We'd have more time to really understand women's situations, the family situations, ask those questions, and be able to signpost, be able to introduce them to children's centres, services, and follow it up. So I would love to have more time. I know your report asked for, you know, for us as a maternity service to be able to signpost more, and it'd be lovely to even have, you know, is in that antenatal journey to have one appointment that just covers all that, that covers nothing medical, but the benefits, the signposting to different things. That would be lovely to have a specialist midwife who did that, who were able to signpost and spend that time. But yeah, time, I think, for us would be brilliant.
Thanks, Jackie. Henrietta or Fleur, do you want to add?
Yeah. Hi. So actually, what we kind of think would be most beneficial to the mothers is quite similar to what Carolina said. It's about local funding. As I said, we've seen such a cutback in things like local children's centres and children's playgroups and things like that. If we just had that increase in local funding back to the levels it was, say, 10 years ago, we would see a natural increase in playgroups, which is going to help with the children's development. That's going to help get the mums out the house. That's going to help mums meet each other in their local area. And then they kind of like create these like natural community support for each other, which is so integral to motherhood, especially in the first 6 months. And I mean, me personally, where we're based, we have a free playgroup that runs once a week by a different service, but it's in the same building. And I tell every mother to go to that one. And I use that then as an opportunity each week to pop my head in and see who's there. And it gives me that opportunity to catch up with 4 or 5 mothers in one go. And things like that actually then help us to help them. Because as Jackie was just saying about time, I've just seen 5 mums in 10 minutes. So it's all interconnected really well. But I think at the core of it, it's about local funding.
Can I thank our 4 speakers? They were really informative contributions. I think it brings to life not only the experience of those women who are impacted by this, but those delivering the services so vitally needed to support them through this. So thank you all 4 for your contributions. That takes us to exactly 11:45, and we've now reached the time for a break. So we're going to break now for about 15 minutes and start again at 12 noon for the concluding part of the seminar. So I'll see you all again at 12 noon. Thank you. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to this seminar. We are going to move to our next session, but before I introduce the next set of speakers, can I remind everyone that you have the opportunity to pose questions in the Q&A function, and after the next 2 speakers, we will have time for questions. So if you suddenly thought of a question to one of the earlier presenters, pop it into the Q&A box and we'll have time to pick that up at the end. So moving on. For our final panel debate for today, please join me in welcoming Andrew Harrop, General Secretary of the Fabian Society, and Thick Jones, Senior Policy Officer for the TUC, who will be speaking to us on investing in maternity pay and benefits. We'll hear first from Andrew, so the virtual floor is yours, Andrew. Thank you.
Hi, Davina. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for the invitation. So I'm the General Secretary of the Fabian Society, which is the left-wing think tank affiliated to the Labour Party. And I've been asked to speak about a report that we published earlier in the year called In Time of Need, which makes the case for sort of reinventing in the UK income protection policies, which are incredibly common in the rest of the rich world, but really have sort of withered over the last 50 years in Britain. And when we say income protection policies, we mean protecting people who are in work or close to work, who see their incomes fall for a variety of reasons: unemployment, sickness or disability, caring for an elderly loved one or a disabled person, needing to retrain, but also particularly for our focus today, because they're looking after babies or young children. As we have basically these 5 areas of sort of risks that people face over their lives, and one of the most predictable ones is, of course, becoming a parent. And we make in that report some proposals on how we how do we go back into the mainstream of rich countries where almost every other country does this much better than the UK does. So I think there are 2 different ways into the discussion about how much money families get during the first year of a child's life. The first one is to focus on child poverty and the lifelong disadvantage that deprivation in early childhood brings us. And I know that is a huge priority for all of us on this call. And it's extremely good news that the Labour Party has committed to a child poverty strategy. And I'm sure we'll all want to be influencing how sort of ambitious and thorough that is. I have argued previously that within a child poverty strategy, there should be a particular focus on baby poverty because of the long-term consequences of low income and deprivation in a child's first life. And I think, thinking about how do we wrap together an agenda that is about higher parental income and support and services for babies is incredibly important. But I want to sort of, that I just sort of want to say and then park, because the sort of the focus of the report we published earlier in the year is about income replacement for everyone. So it's not just about the most disadvantaged children. It's about making sure that all families have decent resources, including resources that are sort of reflect their prior earnings, as well as just keeping them out of poverty. And the phrase we use in the report is employment insurance. So the idea that if you are currently or recently in work, that a significant life event like having a baby shouldn't lead to a complete collapse in your income, as sadly it does for many women who are going on maternity leave. And I just want to run you through the sort of the arguments we make for why employment insurance is such an important principle that has really withered on the vine in the UK. And I've already mentioned how we are in Britain, we are an outlier compared to most other rich countries. So we're the 3rd worst in the developed world when it comes to the generosity of our maternity payments. The USA is behind us, they're even worse, but almost all other rich countries do a lot better. Quite a lot of European countries provide women with 100% of their earnings while they are on maternity leave. And the median of other countries is about 75% of earnings. By comparison, statutory maternity pay is on average, is about 25% of women's prior earnings. So that just gives you a sense of the gap between what we've sort of come to see as normal and where other countries are. So why would we want to support an increase in maternity pay? The first reason is it's really important to create a cushion when women's income falls, earnings fall when they have a baby. and I said earlier, poverty, anti-poverty initiatives massively matter, but actually this is about all women, because it's neither feasible nor desirable for households to suddenly switch off their expenditure if they stop earning for a predictable but quite extended period of time, like a 9 or 12 months of maternity leave. We don't want people to suddenly not pay their bills, to have to feel about, they need to move home because they can't afford rent or a mortgage. We want people to have stability through a period out of work. And that means not seeing a precipitous drop in their family income, even if they aren't previously sort of at or close to the poverty line. So it's a cushion from where you started off, so that you don't have to make those huge lifestyle adjustments that would come by going down to a level of income that is currently provided by universal credit. The second reason is that employment insurance, including for mothers with babies, is a really effective way of keeping people close to the labour market. So we call it, in our report, we call it a trampoline. So basically, if you have a good amount of financial protection for a extended but known period of time, that actually makes it much more likely that you'll make a successful return to work, to either your existing job or back into another new one, because you'll have the resilience and security to be able to make those moves. And then the third reason, which I think is really important in terms of public attitudes, is there's always been huge amount of support in the UK for social protections of one sort or another that are linked to contribution and employment. That sense, I paid my taxes all my life, and the one time I need help, the welfare state is not there for me. And you hear that so often from people. Mum's going on maternity leave, great example, but lots of other examples where people feel, this isn't a life event that's hit me, and they turn to the social security system, the welfare state, and it doesn't feel fair compared to the contributions that people have made during their working life. So the Fabian Society proposal that we make in this report is to introduce much more generous paid maternity leave and much more generous what's currently maternity allowance. We suggest it should be called employment insurance, as part of a bigger system that would be there for other risks I've talked about already, like an unemployment or sickness or caring for a relative. And the proposal we make is that you would keep the 90% of earnings that is currently available in statutory maternity pay for 6 weeks. But then for the duration of a maternity leave, that you should be paid 50% of your prior earnings. Now, interestingly, 50% is not that generous when you look at other countries around the rich world, but it is a huge step forward compared to where we are now, with statutory maternity pay being under £200 a week. So our proposal of 50% of earnings was actually sort of quite a pragmatic, sort of way of finding somewhere in between where we start from today and, sort of where a lot of other countries are. And we also call for women to get their full pension contribution throughout their maternity, because it has a long-term impact on your retirement savings, taking time out of work, as well as your immediate earnings. There are lots of sort of issues to debate within that. So that's the headline of the proposal of how would you make it work sort of in practical detail. The first issue is who should get it. We think that there's a really strong case for wider coverage of access to maternity pay, and some of this has already been discussed by the Labour Party in its policy programme. But thinking about day one rights to statutory maternity pay for all employees and workers, as well as people who are defined in employment law as an employee, and also to everyone in work, so regardless of how low their weekly earnings are. And that makes sense, particularly if you're thinking about a system that is linked to your earnings. You shouldn't exclude people just because they're on low earnings from getting a percentage of what they currently have. There's also a really important debate to have about the duration of maternity pay. 9 months, and when we were doing qualitative research, talking to women, and they just felt 9 months wasn't enough, and that particularly those who felt it was right for them and their family to have 12 months off, you know, their financial situation just plummeted in the final 3 months when they didn't have access to maternity pay. But there is a tricky sort of balance here, because, you know, if we extended the duration of paid maternity leave without first addressing the generosity of maternity pay, actually that could cause more hardship, because, you know, the women we were speaking to just felt that, you know, another 3 months on maternity pay as it exists today was just, you know, would just tip them over the edge. So in our view, it's a sequencing question. In our view, you probably need to deal with the generosity of maternity pay before you push out the duration. But that would be sort of a debate I think, you know, we should continue to have. And I've mainly been talking about maternity pay and paid leave, but it's critical to talk about maternity allowance as well, even if somewhat fewer women were getting it because the coverage of statutory maternity pay was higher. We still absolutely need what we call in our report an employment insurance benefit for mothers, because of self-employed mothers and mothers who have recently been working but aren't at the moment, which might be for a health related reason, you know, linked to their pregnancy. So it's absolutely essential to make sure that there's a good employment insurance benefit sitting alongside a good paid leave entitlement. And actually, I think in terms of short-term changes, I would probably start with maternity allowance. I think that there are some things we could propose to government on maternity allowance to make it as good as maternity leave, statutory maternity pay, which are not that expensive. So firstly, I think providing 90% of earnings for the first 6 weeks in maternity allowance would be, you know, an equalization with maternity pay. And secondly, treating it in universal credit as if it was earnings, which means you get more universal credit as well as your maternity allowance. I think those are two pragmatic and not very expensive things that as an incoming government could be thinking about, as well as, I hope, gradually, gently increasing levels of or both payments, both statutory maternity pay and maternity allowance. I think that, you know, we're not going to see the proposal that we've made for 50% of earnings happen in the first few years of a new government, but maybe we could see some steps towards progress by having the general rate of statutory maternity pay and maternity allowance increase as a sort of a holding position while we have a big wider review of whether to move towards the employment insurance model that I've talked about, which, given that it would be costly. We know a new government won't have lots of money initially. It's probably something to make a commitment to move towards possibly over 5 or 10 years, rather than to be something you can expect a new government to move towards quickly. So those are our proposals on employment insurance in general, and particularly on support for mothers who have to step out of work. I think there's a really good opportunity to widen the debate now. I've already talked about the child poverty debate, but it's really good news that the Labour Party is also committed to its review of parental leave policies in the first year of a Labour government. And we're not expecting a complete revolution through the process of that review, but maybe it opens up space to think about what is the purpose of maternity and other parental leave entitlements, and where do we want to be in 10 years' time, as well as in 1 or 2 years' time. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andrew, for yet another really informative presentation, but also some challenges, both for us as a movement and campaigners, but also to the government. We have another speaker on this panel, so apologies to Vic because I failed to introduce Rachel Drain, who is actually the Qualities and Standards Advisor at the RCM, the Royal College of Midwives. Rachel is going to speak before you, Vic, so apologies. So Rachel, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Davina. I'm just going to share my screen. You see that?
Yes.
Okay. I'll just put it on the slideshow. Okay, so yeah, I'm Rachel. I'm from the Royal College of Midwives, and I'm going to be just elaborating a little bit, adding to what quite a lot of the other speakers have said about midwives and their support to women during the cost of living crisis. So if you Google how to stay healthy during pregnancy, you get broadly the same results, and they focus on things like eating a balanced diet, high in fruits and vegetables, eliminating environmental toxins, exercising regularly, all those kind of things, consuming high quality protein sources, taking a supplement. Underscoring all of those things, fundamental to them all is that they cost money, apart from perhaps exercising, but all the rest of them, they cost money. Interestingly, when I did this Google search, I thought, let's have a look at what information is available to women about how to stay pregnant, how to stay healthy during pregnancy. One of the top 10 results when I Googled it also included 3 things that particularly struck me about important to stay healthy during pregnancy: by going shoe shopping, rethinking your spa style, and to travel smarter. And it just struck me, I'm not sure that the authors of these articles are actually living in the same world that a lot of our women and families are at the moment. We've heard lots of kind of evidence of where people are struggling, and these just seem so out of kilter with what the population is living through at the moment. So we've already heard Andrew just detailed that the maternity pay it's an average of 25% of women's earnings. So for women who are struggling to do even the basics, you know, eating healthy, doing all the usual things, paying your mortgage, paying your bills, as well as actually buying the things that you need to prepare for a new baby. So buying a pram, a safe sleeping environment, clothes, nappies, all of those kind of things. It's a huge cause of stress. The physical effects of stress for a pregnant woman include the release of stress hormones, the most abundant of which is cortisol. High levels of cortisol is shown to affect adults in a variety of ways, and some of those documented symptoms of high cortisol are headaches, heart disease, concentration problems, weight gain, trouble sleeping, you know, lots of unpleasant for the non-pregnant population, but worse so for the pregnant woman. And chronic high cortisol over a long period of time can be known to damage the hippocampus, which is a part of the brain that's concerned with memory and also emotional processing and anxiety. We know that pregnant women who are exposed to stress and are anxious, they're vulnerable to experiencing poor perinatal mental health, with 1 in 5 women experiencing mental health issues that range from anxiety and depression to a more serious disease. And this is relevant primarily because of the woman's experience and that of her family of living with the mental health issues, and later for the newborn and the impact on the critical first 1,001 days. But sadly, the leading cause of maternal deaths between 2018 and 2020 was due to suicide. Worse still is that women who are living in the most deprived areas have a maternal mortality rate that is twice that of women living in the least deprived areas. And earlier, Anna talked about the ethnic disparities as well in health outcomes. So the burden of perinatal mental health to the healthcare service is significant, and perinatal mental illness is the most common condition during and after pregnancy, and yet there remain significant gaps in the equity of access to specialist services. The wider economic burden to the health system of mental ill health adds an additional 8.1 billion for each annual group of births in the UK. So, you know, we can see the economic effects. So stress, just having a little look at kind of the information that's out there for women and families about stress and what to do about stress. You know, there was a huge amount of headlines, those were just a few of them, that's in the public space about the negative impacts of stress. And this here is a headline from the BBC that they run. It's not difficult to see that if somebody is already feeling stressed, you know, this cost of living crisis, as we have heard from all the other speakers, underscoring stress for pregnant women, and it's a vicious cycle when this is what they're surrounded by. especially in light of the physical effects of stress. So looking now at the impact of stress in fetal and newborn life, an elevated maternal cortisol level is associated with an increased risk of miscarriage and other adverse birth outcomes, and even alters fetal development and subsequent adult health. Anna talks about some of these findings as well. Studies have demonstrated that fetal exposure to excessive maternal cortisol level can result in impaired brain development, and there are lower scores of IQ in childhood and poor infant neurodevelopment. Scientists at Imperial College London have found that maternal stress and anxiety affecting the structural development of the baby's brain can result in a greater risk of emotional problems such as anxiety and depression, and behavioural problems such as ADHD, and being considerably slower at learning. And again, our health visitor colleagues talked about how they're seeing this in real terms. Some studies have even gone as far as to suggest that it might increase the likelihood of later violent or criminal behaviour. And so it's fair to say that the effects of stress during pregnancy can last for many years, even into and beyond adolescence. And these effects are felt by individuals, families, communities, whole populations, health systems, and in the economy. So again, when we're looking at why invest in maternity pay and benefits, we've already seen that the benefits of investing in maternity pay and benefits are they're like ripples on a pond, and I just listed, you know, who those benefits relate to. So we need to consider including not only what pregnant women and new mothers get in their pocket in real terms of money to spend, but actually that support in investing in maternity is also relevant to those who provide services as well, you know, provide some services to pregnant women and families. The government estimated that England was short of 2,000 midwives. This was almost 18 months ago. And as of May this year, there were 677 less midwives than there were at the same point last year. Unfortunately, this exodus of midwives continues in a downward pattern. The workload for less midwives has increased, with many women who experience hardship requiring not only physical checkups that midwives undertake, but all the other things that I can't remember my colleague's name, Jackie was talking about earlier, that actually, yeah, you know, doing blood pressures, listening to babies, all those kind of things, they're really important part of midwives' workload. But actually, the part of the midwives' workload that has expanded hugely is that other support that we offer. So the signposting to support services, referring to food banks, advocating for women with housing providers. These are taking up a huge amount of the midwife's time. I've talked a lot about stress and the physical and psychological effects, and it's easy to see women who experience hardship have worse health outcomes for themselves and the babies that last a long time, the continuum of the pregnancy and beyond. But actually, there's another point here, that avoiding stress for the workforce as well. When we're looking at the longer term protection of the midwifery workforce and the sustainability of the NHS, midwives, like most of the NHS, are working under increasingly difficult conditions. So ensuring that there's appropriate investment in maternity pay and benefits doesn't only affect the well-being of women and families, but also the midwifery workforce and the wider NHS.
Thank you very much, Rachel, for that contribution. And it's quite a sombering impact of the fact that this cost of living crisis is not only having in current generations, but in future, due to the stress experienced by pregnant women. And I think if we can't convince the government on a moral argument, there's also an economic argument that you've put forward and the impact in communities going forward. So I would like to invite our last speaker of this panel, and that is Vic. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Thanks so much, and thanks for having me. My name's Vic Jones. I'm a senior policy officer at the TUC, and my role is to lead the various strands of equality work that we have. So I've introduced myself previously as the master of nothing because I have a brilliant team who lead on all the different strands of our work. I've got a brilliant women's officer, Nikki Pound, who I'm sure many of you on the call will know and will have worked with previously, who I am deputising for today. So she has given me a lot of intel and a lot of notes in terms of our position, where we are, what we're working on. So I'll run through some of that. I've broken it down into two sections, and huge apologies that I haven't been able to be here for the session this morning, because I'm a bit I'm anticipating I might cover stuff that's already come through. So I'll whiz through what I've got, and then we can perhaps have a bit of a chat around any questions you've got from your side for the TUC. So I've broken my contribution down into two sections, and the first thing is to have a little look at the scene, what the scene is for working women in the UK, because I think that will help inform our conversation around the impact of, a lack of investment in maternity pay. So we've done an awful lot of research around low pay at the TUC. We know that insecure part-time work means that women are, at the bottom rung of the economy in terms of income and in terms of what they are receiving from employers. We know that in 2022, 14% of women earn less than the real living wage. That's a huge number of women. We know that women make up 3/4 of part-time workers as well, and we know that Black women are significantly overrepresented even on 0-hour contracts, which has a huge impact on their earning capability and their position in terms of secure work as well. We know that women are more likely to be in receipt of universal credit, something which I anticipate has come up a lot on this conversation as well. Women make up 57% of those claims. And we've been doing some real thinking, particularly with Nikki and the rest of the team, around that household basis for universal credit and the impact that has on women's financial autonomy, which is even more acute when you move into the situation of maternity leave, depending on pay and the circumstances there as well. We know women are more likely to work in the public sector, and we know that the real terms pay cut in public sector pay over the last decade means that in effect women or those also working in the public sector are £207 a month less better off than they were in 2010, which is huge, isn't it? It's a huge amount of money to be out of your pockets. And then we look at where we are in terms of the maternity benefits that are available. And Andrew's already touched on some of this. We aren't doing well, are we, in terms of maternity pay? The OECD ranked us 9th lowest in terms of our position in terms of maternity pay, statutory maternity pay. We also know it's not a day one right, which I'll talk about a little bit later on as well, just in terms of Labour's approach to that and what we're doing there. And we know there are huge disparities for self-employed mums as well. So some brilliant work has been done by Pregnant and Screwed in terms of taking that campaign forward, as well in terms of what that looks like and what the offer is for self-employed mums. So that kind of sets the scene as to where we are, the state of play for women in the economy at the moment, and then also what's on offer. And we know that it falls really short of what is required. So we've developed some asks, and I've got Nikki's copious notes here. I won't read them verbatim, but there's an awful lot there. One of the key things for us is increasing the statutory maternity pay and maternity allowance to the same level as the real living wage. As I highlighted before, we know 14% of women aren't even making that on a day-to-day basis. So then you add in maternity leave, and as Andrew outlined really well, a drop in income, we're in a really, really dangerous situation. So that's our first push, our first big ask. We want to help self-employed mums by paying maternity allowance at an equivalent rate for the first 6 weeks, which I think again is a really important call. It really stops that hardship right at the start of a period of leave, but we have to have a conversation about what that looks like going forward as well. The day one right, I think, is really important. That qualifying period, it has a huge impact on women and their ability to earn and to also just survive on that maternity leave period as well. And it has a huge impact on how much time they can take. So we're doing an awful lot of work on the New Deal for Working People and what that looks like. Labour's proposals to introduce that as a day one right is a real step in the right direction. And we're really working with them to see what that looks like. I think the asks around increasing the amount of pay, I think that comes in there as well. But that day one right will be huge. It'll be a really significant step in the right direction for a lot of women. I think this all comes in the context of the broader ask around childcare, from the end of parental leave. And again, we'll be looking at that commitment from Labour to talk about reviewing what's on offer at the moment and how we can impact that going forward as well. We've got our asks around universal credit as well and what that looks like, which I think will have a huge impact. So the calls that we've been making around removing the 2-child limit, the benefit cap, and restrictions for women with no recourse to public funds, I think is really, really important as well. We've had some brilliant motions from our affiliates. I know there's quite a few affiliates on the call, and hearing from Rachel was really pertinent because we had a motion from the RCM last year talking about the stress and the strain on the workforce, talking about the number of midwives that are leaving the NHS because they are just exhausted and demoralised and unappreciated. That's something that is one of the motions that's come through from our conference, as well as some really clear calls for us to work on things around the government's dispersal policy and the impact that has on asylum seekers as well. So we know that affiliates are doing an awful lot with this. Unison have done some brilliant work on the impact of austerity on women. I mean, the news yesterday of David Cameron coming back and what that's going to look like, I think is we're in an interesting time. But, you know, we know that austerity has had a huge and continues to have a huge disproportionate impact on women as well. So in terms of where we are, we've got some really clear asks in terms of what we want to take forward as well. We're also doing some research around industrial action and the impact on women who take industrial action before they go for maternity leave in the period immediately before. They can see their maternity pay reduce because of that. So that's something that we're currently looking at. We're doing some digging into kind of the legal positioning around that. But for us, this is a real priority. You know, this is something that has a huge impact. I myself personally came back from maternity leave in January, and I can't tell you the number of my friends who I made in those baby groups who were having those really serious conversations about whether they could afford to take more time off when they had to go back to work early. Conversations are now coming around about who's going to have another baby, and the real question is who can afford to have another baby. And I think that's going to be a conversation that's happening up and down the country. So I'll leave it there. I know I've spoken a little bit in terms of the financial situation and the impact of the cost of living crisis on women, but for us, I think our key asks around reforming what's out there and also getting that day one right are really, really crucial. So I'll leave it there if that's okay, Davina.
Thank you very much. And again, another informative contribution. And I think most importantly, the clear asks that we could all get behind campaigning to demand from the government. We've got time for some questions for all of our panelists, but if we start with Rachel, Vic and Andrew in the first instance, I have one question, but I urge everyone on this call to please start typing again. We had a flurry of questions after the first panel, so it'd be really good to have another flurry of questions. So the first question is there an analysis of the medium-term cost savings of better SNP, e.g. reduction in the cost incurred by the impacts of poverty for parents and babies in the first 1,001 days? So I'll open that up to Andrew, Vic or Rachel, who would like to answer first. Don't make me pick on you. Andrew, well volunteered.
I'm not aware of specific evidence about SNP. I mean, there have been some really good studies over the years about the business case, if you want, for that early intervention and the lifetime impacts it has through primary, secondary school and onwards into working life of really effective intervention. And the evidence shows that quality public services and putting money into families' pockets are equally effective. And I think it's really important that we remember that money to spend on your children and public services need to go hand in hand. So there's no need to have a sort of an either-or discussion about should we be investing in fantastic support for the family or should we be giving them more money? The answer is both.
Thank you, Andrew. Rachel or Vic, would you like to add to any? No. Vic, you came off mute. I'm saying that as a keenness to have an intervention here.
Yeah, I saw Rachel do the same thing, so I was playing mute chess. Completely agree with Andrew. I think from our side, we're currently looking at what our opportunities for research are for the next year. We go through an internal process looking at, you know, what we want to prioritise. And this question has come at a very good time because we're having a conversation about this afternoon. So yeah, I think there's definitely, I agree with Andrew completely, but let's see if we can have a think about what that data would look like and how we can use that to kind of help us kind of shore up the argument, isn't it? I think it's a really good point that you made earlier, Davina, around, you know, if we can't win the moral argument, what are the economic arguments that we can put behind this as well?
Thank you, Vic. Rachel, did you want to come in?
I've not really got anything eloquent to add, but agree.
A question I posed to the earlier panel was in relation to housing, what one thing would you change? So my question, as we wait for more questions to come in to the three of you, would be if there was one thing you could change that would make life better for working new mums or pregnant women who are at work, what would that thing be? The answer we got for housing was essentially money and time. So I'm looking for more innovative ways, not just the money or time answer, which you've already given us actually as part of the first question. So what one thing would you change to make life better for women who are pregnant and at work, or new mums returning to the workplace? And I don't know, Vic, would you like to go first?
Yeah, it's a really good question, isn't it? Because you kind of go through things like the day one right, and those aspects I think would make a really big difference. But then I think thinking about women, and if we think about maternity leave as a moment in a woman's career or in a woman's working life or in their life altogether, what's the thing that's going to make an impact more holistically? And I think that's about treatment at work. And I think that's about treatment from the moment you disclose to your employer that you are pregnant, or even before that, you know, depending on your experiences. And that protection all the way through, from returning from maternity leave, going back to work, what that looks like as well. And I think my experience working for a union and representing members, and the experience we get from affiliates, is that women come across so many barriers, whether that's, you know, discrimination on a really like black and white sense, you know, in terms of unfair treatment, in terms of, you know, roles being made redundant, in terms of, you know, coming back to something that wasn't there, not having the right provisions for breastfeeding, and all of those things, you know, those really black and white things, to pervasive mistreatment that has a huge impact on their ability to get promotions and to, you know, progress their careers. And more than that, I had a case in my previous job at the FDA where a civil servant who had been a civil servant for 30 years had a really clear moment of discrimination when they came back from maternity leave. It was unfair treatment. They were overlooked for a role during a restructure because they were on maternity leave, and the way it was handled, that individual decided they were going to kind of take it on the chin, move forward. And it got to a point where this woman was about to retire, and she said to me, look, Vic, this is what happened to me 30 years ago, and this was the pinpoint moment, and my career has gone in a completely different direction because of what happened in that instance there. So these aren't just, you know, short-term interventions that have a short-term impact. This is something that has impacted that woman's career. And we sat down and we mapped through the impact on her earnings, for example, and her, you know, career progression, and what that looked like, and her ability to have other children and financially make that work. And it's a huge impact. So I think it's, you know, the easy answer to a very difficult question is it's around that treatment at work, and holistically what that looks like, because I think it has such a huge impact on working mums and working families, you know, the families that go alongside that. So sorry, not a very not a great succinct answer, but that's where I would go with that as well.
No, that was a really good answer. Thank you very much. Andrew, would you like to come in next?
Oh, I totally agree with what Vic said. I was thinking of a family member who sounds very similar to that story. So I've already talked about some of the things that we think are important, and echo what was said about day one rights being sort of like the starting point for that wider process of reform. I'll just say something I didn't mention earlier, which I think is really important, which is how much money and support we give to women during pregnancy. So I think that having better universal credit support as well as grants during late pregnancy is something that, again, it's a fairly small period of people's lives. I think the government could afford to be much more generous to women in the final 3 months of pregnancy than they are at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. Rachel?
If I can't pick time and money, which I would also like, if I had to pick something else, then it would be investment in workforce. I think more midwives means more support for women, which means better outcomes. More investment in the workforce means better training, so those midwives are able to then signpost women to the most effective service and you know, sort of the whole plethora of rights that they are entitled to. So I think it would be investment in workforce.
Thank you, Rachel. You expertly avoided the money and time trap by calling investment. So I'm impressed. Well done. We now have a question that's come in, and I think it's specifically targeted you, Vic, which is around the TUC Anti-Racism Task Force, and asking whether or not they are looking into potential difference in treatment that is causing such high numbers of Black babies dying during childbirth, but also Black pregnant women dying during childbirth as well, because there is quite a high rate of mortality for both Black women and their babies in this country. So, Vic.
Thank you. Yeah, a really good question. And for anyone who isn't familiar with the Anti-Racism Task Force, it's a program of work that we launched in 2020, and it's taken on a huge kind of part in our movement. So what we're doing is we're skilling up and providing resources for unions to become proactively anti-racist and to make sure that they are embedding, you know, development opportunities and progression chances for both their members and for their staff, as part of the work we do to become proactively anti-racist. So it's a really brilliant piece of work. There are, I think, something like 30 commitments that we've made, and Riz in my team is brilliant and has taken on the first 14 and is looking at how we take action around those. So the question in terms of, is that one of our work streams? It's not at the moment. The thing that we're looking at, and one of the top things on my list at the moment, is the work we're doing for Black women and sexual harassment. And the reason I'm mentioning that is because we're starting to look at that topic and the impact that it has on women in the workforce, and we're starting to look at it as a collective harm. Which I think is the way we're going to kind of take this work forward, because the treatment of Black women and their experiences of sexual harassment and all of the kind of the stuff that comes around it in terms of the tropes, in terms of how do you report, is it safe to report, what's going to happen. I think that conversation there, we're trying to build that out and look at the collective impact. So that idea of collective harm, I think, is going to be really interesting, and I think that will become the foundation of how we take our work forward. So we're really lucky we've got a brilliant officer in the team, Carol Ferguson, who's leading this work, and I think this is something that the first stage is the sexual harassment thing. That's what we're going to focus on now. But I think going forward, I think this is a really good question for us to consider. And if there's anyone out there that wants to kind of partner with us on some work around that, we'd be really keen to have the conversation. So unfortunately, no, it's not on the agenda for at the moment, but we are very open to what the next phase of work looks like. And I think actually when we talk about collective harm and the experiences of Black women, be that sexual harassment, be that maternity care, whatever it is, I think that's how we need to start phrasing the conversation here, because it's a very trade union thing to say, but you know, a harm to one is a harm to all, and we need to start looking at what the broader impact is as well.
Thank you very much, Vic. Well, the question spoke specifically about the TUC Anti-Racism Task Force. I wonder if either Rachel or Andrew want to maybe reflect on the differential impact that, for example, cost of living has had on Black women and families and communities. And is there anything that we need to target specifically to lift them up and perhaps reduce the maternity mortality rate as well? So I know that's quite probably wider than you expected to speak to on this call, but it is important. It's a significant community that is disproportionately impacted, and we've heard that from other speakers this morning. So is there anything that you're looking at specifically within Black communities, or is it something that you could look to move into for future work? Rachel, do you want to go first?
Yeah, as you say, it's well documented. The Embrace report that is produced every year looks at outcomes, and we know that both Black and minority ethnic women, as well as those who live in the most disadvantaged areas. So for some women, that conflates both of those risks together. Yeah, I wish it were as simple as what can we do to fix it. There's an awful lot of work and research that goes on to look at that, and obviously we kind of support that and will continue to work towards it. One of the things that the RCM has produced in the last 12 months is the Decolonising Midwifery Education, because we know that Black, you know, the number of Black midwives is very, very low, and that so we don't represent the communities that we serve. So we're looking at ways that we can, you know, make our career more accessible for all different ethnic groups. So that's just one example of work that we're doing. But yeah, there's much more to be done that we will continue to support.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Andrew, did you want to add?
I think the where to go back to is basically the complete failure of provision for disadvantaged children over the first 3 years, and obviously that has a big race dimension to it. So the fact that we've seen provision that was imperfect but existed 15 years ago that has just completely fallen away, with the target of resources increasingly going to families in work with childcare needs rather than targeting disadvantaged children both before the end of maternity leave and through the next 3 years, basically has an unspoken sort of race equality dimension to it, and we need to go back to those Sure Start principles of universal but tightly targeted on children with the greatest disadvantage, and alongside that I'd throw in early support for families with disabled children. Again, there's a big read across between race equality issues and disability. So making sure, and we just upend how we've thought about early years support over the last decade. So rather, of course, employment matters and supporting working parents matters, but we need to think about our policies and our allocation of money in terms of closing the gaps between children between 0 and 5, rather than just about it being a way to help people to work, sort of more than they're able to at the moment.
Thank you, Andrew. We have a question. It's interesting to hear from a couple of speakers that the social prescriber role of frontline professionals is recognised as taking more time from frontline clinical work. Is there an opportunity for ICBs to commission these roles more? Rachel, maybe starting with you this time.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, our work with local maternity systems, as well as, kind of working system wide with ICBs and engaging them to kind of look at the distribution of resource in that area. I think, I think there's a huge opportunity there to embed roles like that. Social prescribing leads, but again, that comes back to the investment in the workforce. If they are embedded as part of the workforce, as a point of reference for practitioners who perhaps are not the experts in that, who perhaps don't know what resources are available, I think that would be hugely beneficial to these populations.
Thank you very much, Rachel. Andrew, would you like to add to that contribution?
I've just mentioned something which is tangentially related, which is some work we did a few years ago, which emphasised the lack of provision we've got for children slightly older than the sort of 0 to 1 period we're focusing on, particularly thinking about toddlers, and that we have a real gap in the child development check, sort of like to ensure that that there's about both the child's health but also their educational development and the whole family's well-being and capacity. And the way we basically just sort of step back and don't have regular checks for children between 18 months and 5 means that you're not even getting in the door or sort of having a conversation that might help signpost or identify wider needs. So I think that will be something that, again, at relatively little cost, just having contact with families more often through the toddler years would make a big difference.
Thank you, Andrew. Vic?
Yeah, it's not an area I'm an expert in, but I was just going to share the line from the RCM that came to us at our conference this year, which is I think kind of epitomises it. And it says workforce planning should be based on the needs of women, babies, and families to ensure that staffing levels are safe and that staff have time to provide personalised care. I think that's the epitome of it, right? If that's the need and that's what women and their families need, then that's where we should be investing resource. But yeah, it's not my area of expertise, but I would be led by the experts here, and those experts are the midwives and the care staff that are looking after these families.
Thank you, Vic. Last opportunity, if anyone wants to pop a question or two into the Q&A function, we have time to answer it before we finish. Just to read something out that's come in, and I fully endorse the superb content and presentations. The submitter of the question is flagging up that on Monday, the 21st of November at 10:30, Dr. Sophie Whitcomb and Dr. Phil McHale will be speaking on the Liverpool Live radio show, and the link is in the questions, so we can get that out to attendees today in case you want to listen into that on Monday. Any more questions? I think we've had a really diverse range of presentations, and I think it clearly links from the lived experience panels, and we had words for lived experience individual through to practitioners who are supporting these women in frontline roles, but also policy officers and ones doing research. I think the evidence is quite clear why we need fundamental change in our approach to supporting women who are pregnant and young mums, because the current system isn't working, it is very much broken. And I think it comes down to what we've all said. It's money, better investment in staff, it's money into pockets of new mums and pregnant women, and it's actually time for healthcare professionals to actually sit down and work with these women to provide them the advice and signposts. You hear I am padding out to just in case there's another question that comes in, but I would like to thank, well, we're about 8 minutes ahead, so we do have time for any last questions. Or I might turn that around actually. Other panelists didn't have this, so you are going to get a minute to have any last reflections on what we have discussed and what you've contributed today. And as Vic flicks through her papers, I was going to go to her. Are you ready to go first, Vic?
Yeah, I just thought it was something that I didn't touch on in the notes that Nikki's given me, and it's around the experience of the child's other parent. I come from, my background is at gingerbread, so I'm very used to the single parent terminology. But we had some research that told us 1 in 5 parents didn't take any paternity leave because either they weren't entitled to it, so they didn't meet the threshold for the day one right that we're calling for, or they just couldn't afford the drop in income. And actually, I think when we're talking about the woman's experience of having a baby and going on maternity leave and the support that's immediate around her, their partner, if they're on this, if they're involved, is a really important way to make sure that women are getting the right support. So actually, I think that reform of the parental leave policies that Labour have committed to is really important, because I think it will have a broader impact as well. I know a lot of women consider their ability to go back to work based on what their partner is doing and their circumstances. So having that conversation, I think, also has a huge impact as well. So I just thought it was really interesting. 21% of parents didn't take that paternity leave because they couldn't afford it or they didn't qualify. And I think having that conversation as well that runs alongside the conversation we're having here around women's rights and maternity pay and all the actions that we need to do around that, I think is really, really important. That's the only thing that was on my list that I didn't talk about.
Thank you, Vic. Rachel, would you like an opportunity for a final contribution?
Yeah, I guess it comes down to, as we've said, the WTF, which is not what perhaps you're thinking, but it's the workforce training and funding, that underscores all of this to improve outcomes for women, families, neonates, those critical 1,001 days. It's investment, not just in as Vic said, not just kind of money in women's pockets. Absolutely, that's important. But actually that investment that underscores all of it, it's your breastfeeding supporters, your health visitors, your neonatal nurses. It's across the spectrum, which, yeah, is a huge ask. But as you said, Davina, the system is broken at the moment. So there's got to be some change.
Thank you, Rachel. Before I bring in Andrew, if any of the previous panelists want to contribute, because I see Henrietta and Fleur have turned on their camera, please turn on your camera and I'll call you in after Andrew. So Andrew, you're still muted.
Thanks. I thought we'd got used to not doing that anymore. So I just want to emphasize the three things that matter together, and they're all important. So services and support targeted at families who need help most. Fighting baby poverty. So that's making sure that the floor is higher for all parents, all families with young children, and replacing people's earnings so that people don't see their living standards plummet at a time when they should be focusing on their new baby and their family rather than about making ends meet. And they're all critically important. And I think we can move forward on all of them rather than ever feeling that we're being forced to make a choice between those three things.
Thank you very much, Andrew. Henrietta and Fleur, would you like to contribute? Last thought.
Yeah, so just touching on, workforce recognition, because we realize there's a lot of mothers who, recognize what the midwives would give to them antenatally, but they are not sure or they're not clear about what health visitors, our role and the support that we can give whilst they're in the community. So it would be great if, this awareness is created so that they know what we can support them in the community. And also through that, I think recognition of what we do in terms of liaising with other multidisciplinary or other services, especially with housing, because with mothers who are requiring, housing, they are in appropriate places. Sometimes our letters do not really go far. But if, as professionals, if we recognize as, a support for these mothers in times of need, I think that would support these letters that we send out. And that's what I wanted to add, from ourselves. Thank you.
No, thank you very much. Any last contributions? No. In that case, we have now reached the end of this seminar, which I hope you have enjoyed as much as I did. I think no matter how often I attend these kind of seminars, I always come away knowing much more every time, because I think the evidence and the research carried out by Maternity Action just helps build that evidence base to make the demands for more workforce, more investment, more time and more money. So I'd like to finish by thanking you all for attending. I'd like to have a special thanks to all of our speakers for giving up your time to share your experience and knowledge with us. I'd like to thank Unison and Aberdeen Financial Fairness Trust for their generous support for this project. And I think my next thing would be a call of action. We have been presented by clear asks that are succinct, that would make a significant difference to the lives of working women. And I think it's now to mobilise a campaign and take our demands to government and demand change. So on that note, thank you all for your time, and I look forward to seeing you again at a future seminar. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye, everybody.